Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Business of Property. I am your host, Cheryl Leong from Property Development Australia. At the Business of Property, we interview superstar guests in the property development space that share their expertise, their deals, and their stories to help empower, build, and grow our community of property developers and investors. So, hello, Facebook land, LinkedIn, YouTube, whoever's watching us live today, give us a shout out and pop in your comments below or wherever it is on your screen. Ask questions and engage. We love lots of questions. So our guest tonight is the founder and director of 𝐉𝐢𝐦 Property Advisory, 𝐉𝐢𝐦 Martinez. With over 20 years of experience in property transactions and 15 years of property development, I've invited Jim to share a bit about his journey in the property space. And in particular, the whole topic today is about the experience in sourcing development sites that stack up. And Jim will share with us some tips on how to identify and assess potential projects and walk us through a little bit of a case study as well. So without further ado, may I invite Jim down to the Business of Property dance floor tonight. Hello, Jim. How are you doing?
Hey, Cheryl. I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Lovely to have you here. So, Jim, share a little bit about who you are and in particular your property development journey so far.
Well, so I've been in property, as you said, my first experience with it was probably when I was a kid at 10. I remember being a little kid and just loving property. And I used to love drawing floor plans on an exercise book. My mum used to think it was just a crazy little passion of mine. But then I grew up and, went into uni and did marketing and a few other different things. And I thought I'd be a graphic designer or an architect, but never skilled in that way. So I moved into the corporate world and did things. But property was always the passion and it was always there on the side. So I started developing when I started investing at 22. It was my first property transaction, which was really scary because I literally got my first job. And I remember I was just busting I was a temp initially after uni, and then I was 3 months probation before you could get that mortgage. I remember being a 22-year-old and all my mates were going out and having fun. And I was excited about getting a mortgage and they're thinking, are you okay? And I was okay because that's what I love to do. So I bought the first one at 22 and then it just spiraled. Every couple of years I bought the next one, and then I built my family home when I got married at 27. And then I started property developing at 30, so a few years after that. And it just continued to roll afterwards.
And what was it about property? Like, why? At 22, when, like you said, everyone's sort of partying and doing other things or just growing careers, like why property? Why the draw towards actually I'm going to invest in property? Did you have at that time a vision of what you wanted to create?
That's a really good question. I think for me, I followed the traditional path of going to uni, getting a bachelor's, getting an MBA. I climbed the corporate ladder. So property was always a side gig for me. So I invested on the side for a while. I'd come home after work, I'd climb the corporate ladder, did the MBA thing, was a director in a healthcare company, and did that for quite a long time while I was developing part-time. My wife, I'm lucky enough to have amazing, talented wife as an accountant. And she's got a passion for property. So during all those years, we would be the team, we'd come home from work, put the kids to bed and talk about our next project. And it was always the numbers and the strategic direction and the objective and what are we going to do. So it was always property on the side to begin with, because I just, it came from a Greek background. You've got to do the right thing, go to uni, get a job, follow the lead. But that passion was there on the side, and then it slowly grew and grew until it became the full-time job. And now part of my business is that and the advocacy side, which is just sharing the learnings for clients that haven't done it before. And I think ultimately when you've been at that point, I remember my first one, and it was just such a challenging moment in my life because I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I think we were talking before, I literally had everything on the line. It was one of those life moments as a person that you just go, have I done the right thing, or have I really messed everything up and lost it all?
Yeah. And so what was the first property?
Well, I've always, I was saying earlier, I always had this passion for the Bay. So, I grew up in Endeavour Hills, sort of Dandenong area, very low socioeconomic Greek migrant family. And I really, from 10, designing homes, but that journey was always, how can I get closest to the water? And so property development was that vehicle to slowly develop one project at a time to allow me to get to my dream home. And so, you know, I acquired a lot of properties, and then I divested a few to build this home. But when we made the first big move, so we built the first big dream house, I remember, I'll never forget it, in 𝐉𝐢𝐦, between both parents, as good firstborn Greek children do. Had our first baby. The parents were 10 minutes away. It was all perfect. And the second baby came along. My wife was 20 weeks pregnant, and we decided to sell this 40 square house that was ready for the second baby and buy this equivalent knockdown home 5 minutes walk from the beach in Mentone, and literally had no heating and no cooling. It was clean, so like
really
I painted it. Yeah, really. The aircon blew up. Heating panels were working. My wife was 20 weeks pregnant. My in-laws weren't happy with me at all, but
I can imagine.
The vision was just to slowly build from there, but it was a challenging ride. I mean, it sounds really great that we made the jump. I think ultimately it was just good having the support of my wife and being in it as a team and sharing those common values, because that was the most challenging project, I think, of my life. Ultimately, I didn't know what I was doing. The builder that we contracted to went under. We nearly lost all our deposit. And I remember some really dark times sitting in bed with a possum above my head, thinking, is this it? Have I really done the right thing? Or should I have just stayed put where I was?
Were you having a deep and meaningful conversation with the possum? Was that the defining moment where you went, I was
thinking he could end up in my bed any moment.
You didn't have any heating, so maybe that's where
Well, we got some panel heaters in the end, so I made it as comfortable as you possibly can make a 60s original home. But look, slowly, it was probably a 2.5 year process of living in that house and trying to navigate, you know, the issues with the builder going under and so forth. But we slowly worked our way out of it, and it wasn't as detrimental as it could have been, you know. And I think the reason why, to be honest, was that it wasn't me and it wasn't just my wife. It was us being together, but also knowing when we were out of our depth and calling on professionals. Yeah. So I think when you've got a really talented team of professionals around you that know what you don't know, they can help you and they can share those learnings. And that's what gave me that's really what saved me, to be honest, from that first project. And, you know, I still have a lot of those people in my team now that, you know, I call on for projects, and there's so much loyalty there, you know, after 15 years, when you think back of what could have been. And, you know, and now that's what I offer to my clients as well, as being one member of an extended team of professionals that can help guide them.
Absolutely. And so what was that for that project? What was the vision and the outcome of the project? So was it a knockdown rebuild, or was it a big?
Yeah. So it was a knockdown rebuild duplex, double-story duplex, and we sold one and we lived in one for a couple of years. And we kept that one as an investment property thereafter. It was an amazing location. And then we moved on to the next one and did the same thing. So we moved around a lot, you know, so every sort of 3-4 years, we moved around probably 4 or 5 times while the kids were a bit younger. So they weren't getting too attached to the residents. But when they got to, you know, 10 or so, we built the final home, which is where we are now. And, you know.
Fantastic. And again, that requires, like, the moving, you know, you've got to be on the same page as well, like, you know, when you're talking about your partner. And we get this question quite often, because there'll be a partner that's really, really involved and really loves property, and there might be a partner that's just sort of like, I'm not interested in all that. So it can be a challenge if you've got a particular vision of where you want to go, but you've got a partner that's not necessarily on the same page. But it sounds like you guys have been, you know, obviously a lot of communication.
Well,
I'm sure you're not always on the same page, but being able to have those negotiation and
yes. I'm always the influencer when it comes to the property side of things, and my wife being the accountant, it's a really good sort of mix. But yeah, there's been some tough moments where we don't agree, and it's about having that conversation to, you know, our relationship is the most family for me. My children and my wife and my extended family are the most important thing. You can take away all the other stuff, it doesn't matter. So if we didn't agree, it wouldn't be an issue. But, you know, I wouldn't give up easy either. I'll still continue to point out all the benefits. But I am fortunate to have not only, you know, the talent of all her financial, you know, nous that she brings to the table in helping to navigate some of the things and be part of this team, but also her passion for property. Because even now, as a buyer's advocate, she's online every day searching for properties, and I'm like, I do this every day, and it's not what I want to be doing when the kids go to bed. It's a lot. I'd rather read a book or something like that. But she really has that same passion, which makes it, you're right, a lot easier.
Yeah, fantastic. So, what are some of the projects? And more, we're talking about finding development sites that stack up. What are some of the strategies that you've used to secure some of your projects? Just to give us an idea of the different types of ways that you can secure projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing I always go back to with myself and every client is the objective. What are we doing with this property? So starting with the end in mind and being crystal clear. So really spending a lot of time fleshing that out. And when it's our own personal project, it's normally with my wife. And for us, in the early days, it was always, how can we manufacture equity and wealth so that we can eventually build that dream home for our family, which is what we wanted. That was where we wanted to land. So we acquired all these properties, and then we divested a few. So that was a clear objective in the early days. And then in terms of sourcing them, we had a lot of extensive relationships with agents in the areas, and especially now as an advocate, being able to source properties that are off market, which, a lot of people don't really know about. And especially now, there's at least 30 to 40% of properties trade without being on the internet that no one even sees.
Yeah, right. That's a really high number.
It is. It really is. And, some of them, I've bought one example today, but there's been at least 4 this year that I bought within 30 or less hours from when they're listed, because everyone's got a different set of circumstances. So for me, the strategy is always, how can I be clear on what I want? And then how can I get that at the best possible price? Because especially even then, but especially now, numbers have always been the center of the game for my wife and I, given, her background. That's always had to be. And it's so important, I think now more than ever, given, building costs, as at least 25% higher than they were before.
Yes. Yeah.
Labor costs are so much higher. There's so many builders going under every quarter. They're forecasting this quarter will be even higher again. So finding a good builder is so challenging. I'm fortunate to have a really good team around me, but that's taken 15 years to build. As my story from the first builder, it wasn't ideal. But I did learn valuable lessons as to what to look out for when I'm looking for that builder. So ultimately, it's always finding the right property, being clear on the right property, and then finding it at the best possible price through relationships with agents. And I think, being an advocate really helps a lot, because I'm a licensed real estate agent, so I can get access to those properties. But even if they're on market, Cheryl, there's a lot of opportunity, just for a client at the moment. It's not a development opportunity, but there's a on market property that just doesn't have a lot of interest in it for various reasons, that will go way at least $100,000 below value, because unfortunately there's a person for a certain situation that needs to sell it at a certain term. So we can give them that price that they want and the extended settlement term, so everyone's a winner.
Yes.
But strategically, from a development point of view, it's always being super clear, number one, and then how do you source that property at the best possible price using a lot of different avenues.
Let's dive into what you mean by being super clear. What do you mean by clear? And does that also come down to the strategy, like understanding what strategy you want to be able to, explore or go down for your client? Because what I'm trying to get to is every client different? And when you're talking about development sites as well, we're talking about development or investments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is it equity? Is it cash flow? Does it depend on what, where they are in their lives? If they're older, that sort of thing. Share a little bit about what you've been able to see.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk. The case study at the end was around equity, so we'll talk about that equity at the end. And then there's other developers. So I'm working with probably at least 3 in the past. This year, 1 active Sydney developer right now, and then 2 in the past this year. And they're full-time developers. So for them, it's building, we know there's a rental crisis at the moment. So a lot of those developers are building to hold and rent. Vacancy rates are at an all-time low, as 20-year low. And that's what I'm focusing on for myself at the moment. I'm looking for, strategically, it's not just cash flow, because I'm not I'm not that close to retirement, despite the grace. So I look for a hybrid strategy where, there is that capital growth that, I look at the market data and extract all the SA3s that have the indicators that show there will be potential capital growth, but also have a cash flow element where they're at least neutrally geared so that I can sustain my property portfolio. And then also have a couple of positive cash flow properties to balance things out. So, that's my personal look on things. With the developers, a lot of them are doing build to rent specific projects. So they're doing 4 to 6 townhouses to rent in specific SA3s that have, less than 1% vacancy. I mean, I was looking at one today, which was 0.6. Anything below 1 is crisis. And 0.6 is terrible. And the lowest one I think I've seen is 0. You can't get any lower than 0. Which is more a regional sort of STR area, so short-term rental area, and that's why there's 0 properties available for long-term rent. So
so that's a really interesting, like, see that just on that itself, how you're saying there's more of that build to rent, like the traditional type, when I say traditional, townhouse type product, where it's not necessarily going to be built to sell all the time, because often we think when we're developing, there's going to be a sale at the end, whereas where they're being really mindful that they're going to be holding it for quite a while. Is there generally the intention to sell at some point, or is it purely an investment play?
I think for some developers, depending on how many units there are. So if there's 6, for example, a lot of them, might sell 1 or 2 at a later stage, or some might sell them immediately. So that there is, depending on their cash flow, because we all need cash flow to fund the next project, as you know. So it's all about how can we get that cash flow side of things, and how can we have the borrowing capacity. Ultimately, when you're borrowing millions, it's quite challenging. But another emerging trend, which, I'm looking into for myself, it's sort of in its infancy, because there are so many international students still waiting. I mean, there's 10,000 student visas or student applications a week at the moment that aren't coming in. So they need somewhere to live. And ultimately, we don't have enough houses at the moment to service our own people, let alone the students coming in and the migrants. So a lot of those shared housing options are a thing that are coming out. And I'm not very experienced in that area, but it is something I'm getting a lot of inquiries around, and I'm looking for someone to partner with around that, because there's a lot of people that specialize just in that field. Absolutely. And I think that there's a huge opportunity emerging there for people to look at. So, and that's still development. You're building 2 townhouses. They're just specifically built for people to have their own room with a bathroom and potentially a kitchenette, and then a shared living space.
Absolutely. And that's what we're developing. That's what I'm developing, basically. Exactly that product in Melbourne, which allows for, ours are 6 bedrooms each, but they're pretty much almost a side-by-side duplex style.
We should talk later.
We should definitely talk. And with and in terms of those of you who are watching, we do have in the Business of Property interviews with a few of the superstars in the co-living space. You've got Matthew White and Sahara, who are also the partners in our projects. We've got Henry Villa, who's also another developer in the co-living space in Melbourne. And also we've spoken to Stuart Baker as well. So have a look at our past episodes of those interviews we've had with them as well, Jim. These are three very, 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 very strong players in that particular space. We've also had Neil. Just to be mindful that there are obviously different regulations for co-living in the different states. And Melbourne is the one that allows for the most number of rooms, up to 9 rooms and up to 12 people.
But that's great. And that's another point. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah. Is another point of partnering with experts that know, their field, because I wouldn't have known that until I found that out from you or a Melbourne expert, which has been on my radar to do when, find that spare time. But,
absolutely.
That's a great piece of intel. And how do you find that out unless you find the right person to talk to? And you've got that whole community, which is what I love about business of property for everyone.
Yes. And it's we talked earlier around that strategy piece where a lot of people who are coming to the development space sort of think, all right, I've got to be able to get into development so I can create this level of financial freedom, and feel they need to consistently be looking for a development to sell and then do the same thing over and over again. But the truth is, like, there are different methods, particularly if you do have a good income and you can build something like a co-living shared housing. I mean, the incomes from those sorts of properties are incredible. Like from if you get good finance in place. So as much as this is a development group and it's all about supporting developers, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that you consistently have to build to sell. That's the point you were saying about being clear on your strategy and being clear on what the outcome is.
Absolutely. And I think, the big trend now, to be honest, with the rental crisis that we're in, is build to stay and, build to rent projects. That's the upcoming trend. Then we've got obviously the shared housing. That's another part of that. But at the moment, I'm seeing, just in terms of clients that aren't property development clients, buying existing properties as investors to rent. Because it's such a great opportunity, and with a downturn in the market as well, even if you're not developing, I'm buying sort of future development sites that people can just rent for the next 5 to 10 years and then later on develop them. So still having all the elements of a development or a future development, but being ready. So just recently I had the most inspiring young couple. They were 21 and 25 who, they won't mind me saying this, they paused a biomedical degree, one of them, and one had an environmental degree. I just found them such an inspiring kid. I felt like they were my kids, and I was working so hard for them. And this is their second property that I bought them. And this one was about, they briefed me as a future development. And we got it probably $100,000 below market value, which they were rapt about because of this downturn and this opportunistic time in the market to buy these properties. So such a huge opportunity for investors, I've got to say. So for them, it was a great outcome. And
that's great.
They're going to be ready in 6 months for their third, I think. But, they've even overtaken me because I started at 22 and I'm saying to them, 21, one of them, and one's 25. What a journey they've got ahead of them. And I hope to be part of it, just even as a friend and an advisor on the side.
And just with it, how you've mentioned around, this future development opportunity, let's talk around that. Like, what are the factors that you look for when someone says, gee, I want to buy a development site? All right. What are the things? And typically, are they telling you where they want to build, or are you saying, yeah, these are the areas that I feel you should be targeting? What are the scenarios?
That's a really good point. I'll cover a little bit of that in the case study, but I'll just go over it quickly. So I've got two. So this one in particular came to me and said, Jim, I want to build 2 high-end townhouses in the Bayside location. And then I have others that come to me, especially from Sydney, that don't really know Melbourne that well. And so they say, look, I want to build based on what people are after. So I need you to find me areas that have, either, good capital growth and low vacancy rates, that hybrid strategy we were talking about. So the first part of that is always, what is their objective? So what are they after in terms of budget, outputs, and what are they planning to build? And then from there, I go and look for the data if they're not sure where the location is and determine the location. So I shortlist some locations for them, and then we go from there. So I've got 2, to be honest. The ones that come from Sydney normally don't know where, and they take my guidance on that. Because there's always, sure you're aware of this, there's always the beautiful science of all the data that we have available and going through it. I spend so much time data driven, which is very important, but there's nothing like the art as well, and having that knowledge on the ground and combining both. Like, for example, that investment property that I bought that was $100,000, the data was saying that I couldn't buy that, but I knew that I could based on my contacts and what I was seeing in that area. So if I was solely to go by the data, then I would have missed that opportunity for them. So, there's both of the things where, people come and say, I want a blue chip location, I want a Bayside, so that makes it easier and narrows it down. And others that say, I want where the demand is, I want a product that's going to be driven by people that want it.
Yeah.
So then when you've got
the second, and so that, let's have a dive further into like that B buyer, where they're saying, Jim, I want to find something. You tell us where's a good area. What are the key factors that you're looking for you to be able to filter down the suburbs that you're targeting?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I look at a lot of variables: affordability of the area. I look at past growth of the area. I look at yields. I look at vacancy rates. I look at if it's a strong sellers, because we know we've got the macro market, but then we've got the micro markets. So I look at what's happening in that micro market in particular. So I get a really good feel for it. And then the socio-economics as well, because that really influences the rental aspect of it. Because we can say, put your rent up, but if people can't afford it, well, then, you're sort of stuck. But yeah, there's so many different variables to then assess that SA3 and then the suburb, and then I rank them and give people, guidance as to what I think is best based on the data and the art behind it. And then we go from there and we slowly tighten that brief. So when I work with any new client, we always start quite wide, and then it takes at least 2 weeks, sometimes even 4, to get it really tight and narrow. And that's when I, like anyone, do my best work. I think when you're really clear on anything in life, business or whatever it is, you just laser focus and you get that great outcome. Whereas when you're really wide, it's like just shooting blanks everywhere. I literally sit down for hours and look at the data with all those variables, and I rank them and I do all the sorting and so forth. And then it's taking that and applying it to the real world, and that working with that client just narrows it down over time to get that best outcome.
And Jim, how much of this is also working with just the mindset and psychology side of things to be able to go, And especially when you're guiding someone, and say, for example, you're guiding someone from Sydney that's buying in Melbourne, and there's a whole lot of trust in there, but I'm sure there's a whole lot of the mindset side of things that holds people back. And you're talking about being able to work with them to narrow it down. Like, talk me through that scenario of guiding them through that psychology and mindset journey.
Oh my gosh, there's so many. That's such a big question. I mean, today I'll give you today's example because it was a classic one. So I had clients from San Francisco that I onboarded last week, and I gave them my recommendations. They just wanted an investment property with a future property development option. So I gave them my recommendations, but they weren't comfortable with those areas and their own research. They did their own research, and they gave me some more challenges on their requirements, which weren't maybe the best investment options, but they made them feel more comfortable from a more safe perspective in what they knew of Melbourne.
Yes.
So then we had our second onboarding today, which was a bit of taking, because we're a team at the end of the day. They're the client. I give them my professional advice and they come back. And so I took a bit of what they gave me, and I took a lot of what I had, and then we combined both to reach that middle ground so there was comfort. But ultimately, when you're working with people, especially at the moment, it's always, for me, I listen more than I talk. Even when I'm working with home buyers, because I buy homes as well, I've been known to be a marriage counsellor, they call me. Sometimes couples don't agree amongst themselves, so I give them homework to do separately. Yeah, I know, right? Put the kids to bed. I say, put the kids to bed, have a glass of wine. Now, you come up with your list individually of the top 10 things you want in your home, individually, and then come together and share it with each other one at a time, and then come to me tomorrow and we'll talk it through. But it's amazing. So there's, the home buyers that have got their own psychology, and there's a lot of fear at the moment, obviously, with interest rate rises. But we are seeing buyer confidence slowly, resume and increase, and there's a lot more investors that are out there. So, yeah, definitely from a property development perspective, people are more fearful because of the price and the cost of building, labor, finding a good builder, and interest rate rises and all those sorts of things. But when, they understand the process and having someone on their team to talk them through and guide them, ultimately we know there'll be more rate rises. And if you're not, and you need to assess your personal situation, we know, at least based on all the mortgage brokers I've spoken to, we're expecting at least another 1% by the end of the year until inflation gets under control. So you need to factor that in. And then next year, we probably should see things flatten out. I mean, fixed rates have now dropped below variables, which is a really good indicator. So I think, if you're ready and you're just sitting on your hands because you're not sure, well, you're missing an opportunity. Because if you're in a financial position where you can buy right now, this is the time to buy. Absolutely. But if you're not, then you shouldn't. So ultimately, it's having that conversation. There's a lot of people. I mean, I look at my board now, there's at least 10 people that want to start, but they're just watching and waiting. And it's funny, Cheryl, I go to them, so what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
And they think,
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for, I don't know.
Something to happen.
I don't know.
A
Something to happen.
sign.
I don't know what. Well, why? I'll say to them, well, while you're waiting, I'm buying bargains for all the rest of the clients. So ultimately, it's your choice. You have to be. It's a personality trait as well. You have to either be in it to win it, or you can just sit back and watch and wait, and then you either jump in at the end or you miss the boat. One or the other.
And I think that's what they're waiting for. Really, it is a sign that something in the media that says the market's picking up. In that moment, that's when they're like, oh, I've got the confidence. I can say someone's told me, and I've seen it in the media, or I've heard it subliminally through whatever, that the market's picking up. But by that time, it's already got to the point.
Look, I love the media, and I won't say anything negative about it, because I was interviewed about when the ANZ Doom and Gloom report came out. It was about a month ago. An Australian property investor contacted me because there was this doom and gloom report, and then there was a CoreLogic inflation report, and he wanted just and that's obviously a lot of analysts sitting in a room with all this data. And we talked about the art and the science. And then he said, look, I really need someone's opinion on all this data that's out there, seeing what buyer sentiment's like and the rest of it. And it's an interesting read, and I don't send anyone there for me to give me kudos. It's really educational for people to read all that data. And then I had a page of comments, and they're all positive and all opportunistic focused, and they put them in. So, they were very, it was a very well balanced article to take all the negative doom and gloom, but then take someone that's on the ground. And, I do this every day. I see a lot of people. I speak to a lot of people. I'm in and out of houses all day, agents, brokers, that's what I do. So I can feel the pulse on the ground. I can see, just this weekend we had a Super Saturday auction, and I saw at least 6 auctions contested with 2 or more people getting great prices in blue chip locations, A-grade properties. So we just had another rate rise, but there's still a lot of activity out there. So I think that's what people are waiting for. You're right, the media. But I was really impressed by Australian property investor taking just a real world feedback, all the doom and gloom of the report, which is, a report, you've got to put it in there. And then just the real world opinion of just me, really, because I'm only N=1. There's a lot of others that have different opinions, but I think on the most part, you're right. People are waiting for the media to say, interest rates are going to stop rising now. It's a good time to buy. By that time, everyone's going to be back. So there'll be 30 people contesting for that same property versus now there's only 5.
Yeah. So everyone's sort of they're holding back from fear, and that's the mindset, that we talk about, the mindset and the psychology side of things. How do you overcome basically fear and doubt, really? And this is what development is about. We talk about, there's always going to be that something that's going to hold you back to take action when it's really what should be driving you forward. So I thought I'd touch a little bit about that mindset sort of thing. So I appreciate you sort of bringing that up in terms of just weighing, just making a conscious effort of weighing things up, of going, this is what someone's saying, but really, realistically, what opportunities is it actually opening up as well? And there are always opportunities in any market. Always opportunity.
There's always opportunities that you shouldn't buy, like those properties that are sitting on the market on main roads, but there's those good ones, the A-grade ones, that you can buy. So
absolutely. Well, I'd love to let's dive into a case study that you've put together, because one of the things that we love is to be able to see the practical application of, our topic today is around finding development sites that stack up. So I'd love for you to talk us through what the process was in being able to identify. Obviously, you've got a particular brief, and then identifying and working through the numbers to be able to go, we know conservatively, these are the numbers that we're going to be able to end up at the end. So let us.
Are we sharing some slides? I didn't memorize them.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So ultimately, I think, as I was saying before, it all starts with the client and getting really clear on their brief. And with this particular client, it's a client case study that I wanted to put on there that was just, we just purchased about 6 weeks ago. It hasn't actually settled yet, but it was an amazing outcome. And that's when we had the first rate rise. So it could have been 2 months. So just confidence was just starting to wane a little bit, but not a lot. So They came to me, they're from Sydney, so they were a Sydney investor, first time mum and dad investor, and they wanted to build 2 high-end town houses in a Bayside location, blue chip. And for them, it was all about building equity so they could buy their forever home, very similar to me, minus the investment properties that I built along the way. So I had to still sit down and look at all the data with that in mind. So at least they gave me a clear sort of region of Melbourne that I could look for, and then go back to them and find, the particular areas that would deliver on good outcomes for them. And then also assess the size of the homes that we needed to get the return that we needed, which would then dictate the size of the block of land that we'd need. So that was sort of step one. And then, the macro process is really identifying, obviously that we just talked about that, the location based on their objective to deliver on it. And then strategically at that time and all the time really for me and how I work is basically looking at buying properties as much below market value as we possibly can. So I see many properties come across my desk daily, either on market or off market due to the extensive network of real estate agents. But I specifically had top 3 suburbs that we nailed down for these clients. And it was all about how can we find the right one with a clear type brief of getting 230 square high-end townhouses on a block. We needed a minimum 650 square metre block in 3 blue chip Bayside Melbourne locations. And then, so strategically, how can we buy it at the lowest possible price? And the strategy for them was specifically looking at off-market properties. And the reason I say that was there's a lot of on-market properties, but there was so much competition. And even right now, Cheryl, we're still seeing, and that's what I was saying before, even with all the rate rises we've had, it still surprises me that this base region of Melbourne is, and I live in it, so I'm very fortunate to live here. It's still so resilient as a market. It's still getting, blue chip properties are getting amazing prices, and they're getting contested with at least 2 to 3 bidders at every auction. Unless they're somehow compromised by either being close to rail or on a main road or something about them is not ideal. They're the ones that are normally sitting on the market. But we also don't have a lot of stock. So finding the properties that are just listed are sort of key for me. So finding the off markets was key, and then shortlisting those properties. So for every property that meets all those requirements, I then do a return on investment viability, which I'll go through in a second. For each shortlisted property, present it to the clients, and then then I present a strategy if we want to move forward with that particular property based on the return.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is just a property that's in progress now. So this is not this particular one, just a picture of a site that we bought, and it was a great corner site. Again in Bayside, but not always in Bayside. And this was a great buy, and now it's at this stage. This is what it looks like now. And I must say, as much as I've been doing this for 15 years, I always get excited when I see something like this, and then the vision that's in your mind come to life to become something like this.
That's the cool thing about development. That's the cool thing, because it's like you look at the image on the left, and you're like, how do I? I've got this image of what I want to create, and that's the great thing about having renders as well these days, because often it's what's in your mind, but to actually see something from a render to begin with before it actually gets constructed is like, oh wow, I can actually visualize. And I'm going to get a little bit hippie here, but that's part of manifesting what you want to create, right? It's the visualizing.
Oh, I love hippie. We talked about this before. It's so true. You've got to be able to see it to believe it, right? If you want it to happen, you've got to see it in your head before it comes out. And that's why this is an actual picture of what it looks like now. So I didn't put the glossy render on it to make it look special. This is raw. It's pretty much finished. Just needs the garden done, the roller doors in, and just the final touches. But it was a corner block, which for me are my favourites. And my last 5 developments, I've been fortunate enough to be on corner blocks, because you get those townhouses that are standalone looking, which are worth, depending on the location, at least $100,000 more. So, a good tip for the listeners is if you can find a corner block that's developable, I would choose that over a normal size block where you have to do a duplex anytime, because it's worth more in the marketplace. Go to the next slide. I'll show you the numbers for this property. So these are the big numbers, and that's me happily holding the sign because it was off market. So we ended up finding. So the first stage of what I go through is looking at what the development cost with plans. So that will include things like the land costs, stamp duty, design, and the interest until approval. And we normally allow 8 months, although I must say this particular council went a bit over, and it's more like 10 to 12 given COVID delays. They're still sort of recovering from that. What set this one apart, given we bought it at a time where building costs, at that time they were even worse than they are now, because there's a little bit of relief in sight. So they were at least 30% higher than they were before. So it was so critical to make this viable that we got a really good price. And we ended up saving, I didn't expect to have such a big cost saving, but we literally got $480,000 below the closest comparable land size in the same street that sold 2 months earlier. So you can't get any closer in terms of comparable. This house, because this family is moving from Sydney to live in the old house while they get plans, and then they'll live in one of the units before they sell it. So this house is a 5-bedroom home. It's actually quite nice. Wouldn't want to knock it down. So it's better than the one that sold for $480,000 more. But that's going to do a lot for their viability. And I've got the numbers in there as we go. But then they construct.
Just on that, sorry, Jim. And so what was the special sauce in being able to get that savings?
That's a really good question. I think it's relationships with agents. So ultimately, this agent I knew, it was very close to. This didn't happen overnight, by the way. I was working for this client for 8 weeks by the time we found many properties along the way. There was many analyses along the way that weren't quite right. Then I knew this agent was going in to sign an authority on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock. So she signed it, and I said, please call me as soon as you sign it. I'd love to come through, just even if it's to give you my opinion. And she got me through at 12 o'clock with they normally do walkthroughs with the whole agency. So she had her director with her. Unfortunately, it was a bit of a messy situation where it was a 50-year marriage. It was quite sad. And they wanted just to sell it as quickly as possible. They didn't want to go to market and have everyone see, the for sale sign and so forth. But they also wanted a 5-month settlement, which we're able to accommodate. So for a lower price, we gave them a longer settlement, which worked. It was a win-win situation for everyone. So it wasn't like we were just undercutting them, if you like. It was like they got a lot out of that because they were able to take 50 years worth of, that house had a lot of furniture in it. 50 years worth of marriage and living in that one home. So I got through at 12 o'clock, and for that 3 hours, had long conversations with the agent, whether she was going to take it to market, not take it to market. And, given the story I was able to paint in the situation that presented, and the fact that my clients were in Sydney and I took a video of it quite live with them on Thursday, we were ready to go. And we made an offer the next morning. So the next morning, 9 o'clock, we had done our DD from 3 o'clock that day. Contract was reviewed. There was no building inspection required, obviously, because everything was working, and they didn't need to live in it for about 10 months.
Yeah.
So it's very solid anyway as a home. So there was no building inspection, even though, as an advocate, I always have to recommend one. And then we put the offer in at 9 a.m. and we got it signed at 2:25. And the reason I remember it was 2:25, the next day I was boarding a plane to go for my first family holiday in 2 years to Port Douglas, and I was taking off at 2:30. And I was on the phone with the agent saying, "Is it signed yet? The plane's about to take off." So we ended up getting the vendors to sign first so that my clients could countersign, which just gave me relief that the deal was done. So I could then turn my
go and enjoy your holiday. Yeah, fantastic.
But I've got to say, it rarely happens. Agents rarely do the counter-signing process. They make you sign first and then the vendor sign. But we had a really strong relationship with this agent, and that's what makes all the difference, I think, is it's all about relationships and being able to influence when there's a strong situation.
Yeah.
So that's how that came about, to answer your question. And that, has happened probably, I can't guarantee that happens every single transaction, but there's been 4 instances this year where a similar situation has happened, and not all for developers. I've got to be honest. There've been some principal place of residence, but they've been quick off-market transactions where people just don't want to do the work to fix them up. I had one in Black Rock where, he was an older gentleman. His wife had passed away a year ago. The house had just become a mess. And he didn't want to spend that time, and he was 80. He didn't want to spend the time and effort, and we just bought it as is at a really good price. And it was a young family. They did all the work and have completely converted it. So it does happen often.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. They said, it's good to see these sorts of scenarios where this is it's a huge savings, right? But it is the off-market
It's
stuff.
massive.
It is the relationships, and it is being able to manage the expectations of the vendors and their needs, and being able to go, all right, if you would like this, then I would like a cheaper price.
Absolutely. And I think it's also the fact that, when you're trusted professionals, like I'm a licensed real estate agent for buyers, they're licensed real estate agents for sellers. So there's that professional integrity and privacy. So you're doing the best for both your clients. And you want to get to that win-win situation where some of that information is confidential and wouldn't always be shared with just anybody, because it just doesn't happen. So But anyway, then the construction part is always fun because it was a bit of a moving feast at that time. So I consulted with 3 different builders that I work with. I mean, I have my favorite builder, but he's always so busy that I've got a bit of a team. So that was the cost of building. Then also, the working drawings, engineering, subdivision, demolition, all those little costs that come at the end, and interest. So that was all factored in to get to the 1440, which was a great price. I've got to say, it was about 3 per square meter because they were 30 square meter townhouses. So it was a very good price, and it was my favorite builder that in the end committed to building it. And then, so the total cost of the project was 3.8. As we can see, I estimated the value of the townhouses based on the concept drawings, and just being conservative, prices were up to 2.7 for something similar with that land size and that kind of finish. So we're just conservative, saying about 2.5, because I really believe that you always have to undercook the numbers, because then if they come up better, you're better off. And especially with clients, there's nothing worse than it's a marketing 101. You don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. I always try and do it in reverse. And then, the profit with the selling expenses, agents' fees, which were about 75 grand based on 1.5%, and the GST gave them 854,000 of profit. So 22% ROI is excellent at this level. But then I just wanted to add in, without that saving, it would have been 10%. So it's still pretty good at 374. But I've got to say, putting in, almost $4 million of, risk and effort and stress as a first-time developer, I would definitely rather be going for the, that, I don't know if people could see my mouse, probably not. I'm circling the 854 versus the 374 because that's that 480 of savings.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Yeah. And often when you're doing sort of a duplex style, people are looking at 10-15% as a decent return, but to be able to get over 20%, that's excellent. And I've noticed that you've included GST here, which if you're holding one of the properties, you wouldn't have to pay GST. Well, speak to your accountant, but they're not having to pay GST because they're not. Well, yes, there's no.
On one, absolutely, on one. So it's an even better outcome. But ultimately, and that's me. I like to take a sold sign when there's no board off markets, just to show it is sold. And it's sometimes for them as well to let them know. It wasn't a really great picture of the house, but they had extended it upstairs and thrown on 2 extra huge bedrooms. And it was a 5-bedroom home, really livable, with a pool in the back. So for a year, they'll be living in style before they knock it down to develop it and build the 2 townhouses, which are now going through the approval process even before it settles.
That's great. And the point that we want to make here as well is the feasibility and the project stacking up starts from the very beginning, because again, you've made those savings at the start. Your numbers are conservative. You've been and so whatever it is that it becomes, it's all about the risk management of going. If I can negotiate and buy well from the very beginning, then even with construction increases and all of that and delays, it's going to give me that buffer. Because if you had purchased $480,000 more and the market moved and construction prices increased, then you wouldn't even get that 10% profit margin.
Absolutely. And, the market may move more. It hasn't moved so much in this blue chip location, but it might, and there's no guarantees. I can't predict the market, so it might move. So that 22%, if it drops to 18%, that's still an amazing outcome. But you're right, it is that buffer. So, I really believe in exactly what you said, which is being very clear in the beginning and doing a really thorough analysis before you move forward, because you can do all that on paper before you even go out on site.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jim. And I'm just conscious that we've been chatting quite a bit and being able to sort of get through quite a lot.
It's been an hour.
And I know for those of you that are watching, Jim is based in Melbourne. You do service a combination of investors, home buyers, and developers as well. So not a lot of buyers advocates understand development. So it's really important, if you are looking for someone to help you secure development sites, that they're, one, a developer themselves, and two, that they really understand the development process, and particularly the numbers, and have a team that they're able to leverage. So they're not just hinging off your knowledge. You've got a team to be able to verify the costs and the planning requirements and so on and so forth. So we talk about team a lot, relationships, team, and just doing a whole lot of due diligence and ensuring that your numbers from the very start look good as well. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that, Jim.
Pleasure.
Best way to reach out to Jim if you're interested to have a chat with him, or just to connect. Always good to build relationships here. Let's pop up Jim's contact. So 𝐉𝐢𝐦 Property Advisory, Jim at 𝐉𝐢𝐦advisory.com.au. Thank you, Jet. Reach out to Jim. More than happy to sit down and have a chat and talk about all things property and development. Thank you so much, Jim, for your time. I really, really enjoyed that. I appreciate it. And just
thanks, Cheryl. And just to let you know, I forgot to mention it before, but I've developed some free investor reports looking at all of Australia, so areas to invest. So if people are not sure of where to invest, they can just jump on and download those reports for free on my website. And that's just 𝐉𝐢𝐦advisory.com.au.
A good freebie. And
I thought you would.
Yeah,
so jump on and have a look at those suburbs that we've selected. They're Australia-wide, and there's a Melbourne-centric one, which is probably more cash flow, so that needs a bit more work and specific to people's objectives.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Thank you, Jim. You take care. Have a good night. Everyone else, thank you for joining us. And pop in the comments if you're watching the replay. Tag Jim if you've got questions for him, or reach out to him on his email as well. Take care. Thank you so much for joining us this week, everyone. Make sure you visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Business of Property, where you can find all our past episodes and watch this replay as well. If you've found heaps of value in today's show, hit the like button. You know what to do. Press whatever buttons you need to, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.